Hey everyone, it's me, Christine, the host of the podcast Flourish in the Foreign, which is all about elevating and affirming the voices and stories of Black women living and thriving abroad. Yes, it is. It's really showcasing Black women all over the world, all across the diaspora, who are just doing the damn thing, who are just doing it and doing it well, might I add. The podcast also is about exploring living abroad as a pathway to wellness. And that means financial wellness, professional wellness, emotional, physical, mental wellness, all the wellnesses. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you have heard that each of my guests talks about their personal definition of wellness and how living abroad has influenced their personal definition of wellness and how they practice wellness. And so it's just something that I think is really important. It's really, really important to discuss. So welcome. Today we are continuing the IGTV live series with my past podcast guest. Today we have Amanda Bates of the Black Expat and the Global Chatter podcast. We're going to be talking about so much, and I'm so excited to talk about it. We're going to be talking, of course, about her platform, The Black Expat. We're going to be talking about her podcast. We're going to be talking about being a third culture kid, especially Black third culture kids. We're going to be talking about Black identity across the diaspora, because we are not a monolith and how we identify is not monolithic. And I'm hoping we can talk about some recent current events that have just occurred that I find really interesting. So hopefully we can get into that as well. If you're joining me, please put into the comments where you're joining me from, where have you lived abroad, where you want to live abroad, all that good stuff. I see Amanda's here already. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. I do this every single time because I try to be cute, and that's what happens. Here is Amanda. I hope I got my volume up. Hopefully. Let me turn this up. Hey!
Hey, I was listening to your intro. This is like my first IG live, so I was trying not to fumble. I was like, stuff don't fall apart while I'm doing this.
No, you're perfect. You're perfect. And the thing is when I do these, and now I got this new ring light. Also, shout out to my Patreons and the people who've been supporting the podcast. That's why I have a ring light now. And so
you're like glowing, okay? I got this thing on a tripod and praying it don't fall over. So
that's, if you look at all my past IGTVs, it's literally holding it in like my ring. So okay, thank you so much to the Patreon. Thank you so much for people who cash out the podcast. We got a tripod here. That's great. I got some light, which is helpful because it's already dark here in Barcelona. So that's just how life is, because it's winter. It's the longest winter it feels like. But you're doing great. You're doing wonderful.
I'm not moving anything. So I'm going to sit in my chair and y'all, I go sideways, just like when your friend like trips, but you act like you didn't see it. Like, just keep rolling. It'll be all right. It'll be all right.
Amazing. Okay, for some of you guys who've been listening to the podcast for a while, you already know who Amanda Bates is. And if you haven't seen the podcast, I don't know what you've been doing with your life. You need to get on that, all right? You can check out her episode at www.flourishintheforeign.com/episodes/Amanda. I loved talking to Amanda before we recorded, during the recording, and even after. I feel like whenever we get together, we can just talk forever, and I'm really enjoyed that.
I mean, I tried to stay on topic. I'm already promising it may not happen. And I did get your message, by the way. So yeah, I got some thoughts about that whole thing. Right? I'm going to lead with that, or you want to end with that, but
I don't know. Okay, let's start this. Okay, Amanda, please tell everyone who may not know who you are. Who are you? Tell us about the Black Expat and the Global Chatter podcast.
Sure. So super excited to be here. As Christina said, we have conversations and And in many ways, the conversations Christine and I have are really reflective of the conversations that happen on the Black Expat and the Global Chatter. But I am, oh, I see people I know are hopping on. I am the founder of the Black Expat. It is a site that I launched in the spring of 2016, actually winter, sorry. So fall 2016. And really I created the Black Expat as an opportunity for folks to sort of see themselves who are living abroad, who had a Black identity. I, for 9.5 years, worked in a nonprofit program where I worked with first generation, so predominantly students of color, to help them transition to higher ed. And one of the things that I would always say to them is, when you get to college, you should study abroad. And they would always say to me, but Miss Amanda, I don't really know anyone who looks like me. And so I went out, asked some folks if they had, knew any resources that kind of highlighted Black experiences, and there really wasn't anything. And if I forward kind of before that, why do I have an interest in this international space? I was a third culture kid. I grew up in the United States and in Cameroon. So I grew up in sub-Saharan Africa. I lived in Cameroon for 7 years. So I did all of my middle and high school years there. So I left kind of in my 5th grade year in the US, moved over there, came back to start my freshman year of college. And so having an international perspective and having parents who had, depending on who's using the term, immigrated or expated to the States, and then having to them return to their home country, because I was born in DC, and living in an environment where I've always sounded American. I went to international schools. My mom worked for the US government. So kind of that class differential, international differential, life differential had been part of my story. And then coming back to the US, just realizing how much movement was very much a part of who my identity was. And so the Black Expat kind of came out of that. Some of it came out of the fact that, the Black people who are my mom's generation and older, there were no stories about what they did. Like, Black people have been moving for centuries, and it's not necessarily, in the US we tie movement to slavery, kind of that narrative, but Black folks have been moving for a variety of reasons. It's not always because of that. It's not always because of war. It's not always because of poverty. It's for a bunch of opportunities. And I wanted to normalize and also say, hey, people have been doing this, and be encouraged and be inspired. And so that's kind of where the Black Expat came about. And then I was moving to the Middle East. And so it just kind of grew from there. When I moved to Doha, I believe that would be fall of 2016.
I love it. I love it. And as you're speaking, I realized that I have a YouTube video that I actually did of a guest. Her episode hasn't gone live yet, in which we talked about intergenerational mobility, specifically with Black Americans. And I just think, one, I think you guys should actually talk. You and Tiffany should talk, because I think you guys actually have a lot of synergies. She's super cool. She's gonna hold PhD.
Was it Tiffany Smith?
Yes. Have you talked to her?
I know. I know every Black Expat.
You do know everyone.
They all know. I know Tiffany. Tiffany is awesome. Yeah. Shout out. What is her podcast? Abroad in
Education.
Yes. Amazing podcast if you're interested, just in general. Okay, I'm done.
So good. And such a good, this is the thing, what I love your platform and conversations with you, because we really talk about, we just get into the nuance and the history, and a lot of things that are, portrayed in media is always about, one, it's white centered.
Yeah.
And it's always very surface, and it's it drives me nuts, because I'm just that is not the story. Our arts revolved around white people, and
well, here's what's really fascinating. If we take it back to my job before, and I've always worked with young people, I work with young people now, I am back in the States, it's that, when we look at even how we all grew up, there are very few movies, I don't even know if you can name any, that center around a Black or brown character having an international movement opportunity, and it isn't necessarily tied to some sort of tragedy. So I always used to say, I think of Audrey Hepburn, who I actually loved as a kid because I loved musicals, and I saw her in My Fair Lady, and I thought this was the most amazing thing. But we think about Roman Holiday. I mean, that's kind of old school, right? But you never see a story where a young Black person just goes and has a holiday somewhere, and it isn't this complicated narrative, right? And so it's true, like we don't, we don't see ourselves doing that. And then especially when you're talking to younger folks, and I love what's happening with social media now, but even just saying, oh, you could go here and study abroad. And because I did an episode on study abroad in the podcast, and my friend Corey, who is African American, hardcore, does diversity issues, talked about there's a lot of stuff that mentally people have to get over because they just haven't seen historically that be part of the narrative. And so yeah, I agree with you. Like in terms of even how we center media, it's not as diverse as it could be.
Yes, yes. So let's actually dive into that. But first, I want to invite everyone. Hey, everyone! Thank you so much for joining us here. We're gonna have such an amazing, juicy conversation. So you definitely want to stay and tune in. Be sure to share it with your friends, and also let me know because I don't know if Sam is here. Sam, hey Sam, maybe if you're here. Sam, I went to law school with Sam at the University of Miami. He's, I think, still in Miami, and he is a third culture kid. And I remember when I met Sam and being like, wait, where are you from? Where have you lived? Why do you speak Arabic? I was like, he's so smart. So amazing guitar player, lawyer, like he does everything. And so I was wondering, Sam, if you want to, you could like maybe put in the comments your experience, if you identify as a third culture kid, and some of that. Because I remember when I met Sam, I was like, wait, what? What? Like, and I was like, what, 22 when I met him? My mind was blown. I was like, so why do you speak Arabic and English? Like, what's going on here?
Well, I think third culture. So for those who don't know, there's this term called third culture kid, and it really apply. And it's funny because you eventually stop being a kid, but you still use the term TCK. It's like you're 70 years old and you're still TCK. It's essentially young people between the ages of 0 and 18 who have had some kind of international mobility experience. And so typically, historically you think of like maybe your parents were diplomats or they were missionaries or they were business folks or whatever that reason was. Your parents lived somewhere and then they moved somewhere. And there's some that are high mobility. So like if you're a diplomatic kid, your family moved maybe every 2 to 3 or maybe 3 to 4 years. And then there's some folks where their family was from one country, they moved to another country, they lived in that country because maybe they worked there, began a business there, but they are passport holders of a different country. And so TCK is a term, there's a great book by Ruth Van Raken and David Pollock, which is the original book that came out. It's almost called the TCK Bible, which really goes into what third culture kids are. And then what I was really excited is that as they did additional editions, they started talking about CCKs. And those are cross-cultural kids. And so you may, for example, have a kid who was born and raised in Atlanta, but maybe their mom is from Alabama, black woman from Alabama, and their dad is from Nigeria. That's a cross-cultural kid. Or, it could be interracial. It could be whatever. And so those are kids who are also impacted by a variety of cultures. And I think that especially when you look at somewhere, even particularly like the US, you're going to see like when you look at massive cities like Miami, New York, Philly, but where you get like really strong immigrant cultures, you've got a lot of cross-cultural kids there. But I'm a TCK and a CCK because you can be both just by the virtue of having lived, not only having parents who were not American when I was living here, but also then having lived in between two and really 3 cultures because I went to an international school. So that's a whole nother story.
So let's see. Sam says, my dad was a scientist, moved to Syria at 8 and left at 18. I didn't know you lived in Syria. You obviously told me that.
See, all the stuff that you learned.
Okay. You know what, though? I actually want to get into what I sent you earlier today. You know why? Because we talked about how it's important for people to see representation in media. And this is not what I meant. So I don't know if you guys have seen on Twitter, it's a huge hubbub basically a Black woman, a woman who identifies as a Black woman, or a person who identifies as Black woman and queer, had a Twitter thread where she was saying, I moved to Bali and I get to like live my best life, and you can too, buy my ebook, right? And
hustling though, gotta get the hustling. Sorry.
and this is something that we've talked about, and I've talked about several times on this IG, and everywhere else. People hear me say this, okay? And people were like, how are you trying to encourage people to move in the middle of a pandemic, move to a developing country in a pandemic? And also, it became abundantly clear that her and her partner had overstayed their tourist visa. They're illegally and clearly not paying taxes. Probably don't have any health insurance either. So
at all. And make a retirement plan. But anyway.
Yeah. And you know, talking about obviously engaging in geo arbitrage of, you know, being able to leverage their USD earning power on the island to live a very nice life. I've been to Bali. I love Bali. I can see how people are like, oh, I'm staying here. I get it. But I was just like, I was so mad that it was a Black woman that was getting this backlash. Because I was like, there's a bunch of white people who do this all the time.
But you know what though? Like,
I was so mad. Because I was like, especially in East Asia, white people do this for like forever. And I was like, damn, I'm mad that it had to be her. But
Christine,
it's so aggravating. It's so aggravating because what she's doing is problematic. Because then there's conversations about colonization and can you colonize a place if you're Black and all this other stuff. And I was just like, yo, it's
okay.
It's
So here, I am of the opinion that one of the things, like, because I've done the Black expat long enough, I've seen enough interesting perspectives come left and right that nothing shocks me or surprises me anymore. I think that there are definitely multiple sides to this story that I am sympathetic to on across the board. So if we frame it, young woman and her partner moved to Bali, they're having this great experience. They want to tell other people, hey, you too can have this great experience. I get that part, right? They found a place where they felt safe. They found a place that they loved. They found a place that they feel like they were getting what they needed. So they wanted to share that information. That's cool. I think that one of the challenges, though, that is that, and I'm saying from a Western perspective, because as you know, the Black expat is Black inclusive. So we have stuff that's totally not Western in influence as well. But one of the challenges is that we often have to be aware, very aware of our own privilege. And I think that when you come from a specific space where you have felt intersected oppressions, right? So probably as a woman, as a Black woman, as a queer Black woman, and maybe because there's some age in there too, probably even as a young Black queer woman, right? That there have been some oppressions, there's been some issues that she's had to face that have been her situation. So I am sympathetic. But the thing that we always have to remember is that things look very different depending on where we start and where we sit. And so when you go to another country, see, the oppressions that we often have to, that are ones that are the forefront, like maybe at home, then become something different in another country. And so you're Western. So their first thought is you are Western. Okay. So it may not even be color. It just may be, oh, you're an American. And let's be honest, in a lot of places, most places, I have traveled enough, lived enough places, an American passport has a lot of power.
Yes. Yeah.
Like you, that does not have an American passport, let's say a Jamaican passport, a Ghanaian passport, a Kenyan passport, may not have the same level of privilege. So the first thing is that we have to reconcile also with our Western privilege. See, it's different when we're all in a Western country because that's not to the forefront. It becomes something else when you go to a different country that's not Western. The second thing I thought that was super interesting, she talked about as being, you know, in a queer couple. And I kept thinking to myself, though, like, holistic interestingly, I don't think of Indonesia being as that's the part that if anything else, that's the part where I went, but Indonesia isn't the like gayest friendly country on the planet. So you're talking about a very niche experience in one part of Indonesia, but that ain't all of Indonesia. Because I personally don't want people to go out there and get caught. Because you go out there and get caught out there and realize,
don't be going to just Jakarta thinking you could do that, or Borneo. Like what?
And so there's that factor where I'm like, you need to preface this with saying, this is a very specific part of Indonesia. And then the other part is the overstaying the visa. Ma'am, like you ain't there legally. I don't know personally why you would tell people, first of all, that you're really not even that legal, which also, keep in mind, American privilege. Because if you were from some other country and you were overstaying your visa and felt comfortable enough to say it on social media.
Come on.
Now, the colonialism part, I'm not gonna lie, I get that part too, because I have seen conversations where folks, due to their frustration, particularly being in the West, particularly being in the US, they're like, okay, we can all go here, we can set up our own community and do all this other stuff. But I'm like, but bruh, how is that different if you're not taking into consideration where you're going and understanding the culture and the people and all of that, how is that different than what you would say happened in the US? Because one of the arguments I saw, and this was kind of ruffling me the wrong way, was, and I get the sentiment of this person. They were saying, imagine someone who's been like living in the US, they're stressed out, this country's been built on the back of minorities, and then telling them they're Here's the thing though. People left Europe because they were being persecuted and came and colonized somewhere. So it's not like the reasons doesn't negate the fact that they did it. That's all that I'm saying. So because you can make an argument, there's a good portion of this country, right, that was founded by folks who left Europe because they were being persecuted. And then they came here and persecuted other people and colonized other people. So you can't just say, well, because she has faced that sort of oppression, like she couldn't also be a perpetrator of a system, because you can. Okay, I'm done.
No, because I completely agree. And the crazy thing is that people don't even see themselves. They don't think it's possible to be perpetrators. And I think it's because they aren't moving with intention. That's my biggest thing. Like, because people aren't moving with intention and they don't have intention to cultivate community. People, like, I think one of her threads and her Twitter things, she's like, I need to go to Bali to heal, which is like my biggest pet peeve. I'm like, a country and a people are not here to heal you. That's not your balm. Okay, healing happens. You are part of your healing process.
Right.
People who say, oh, I had a healing experience, is because they engaged in community somewhere. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that is what it was. And I feel like because people don't go to engage in community, they end up having this kind of experience and then thinking it's proper to then try to sell this experience. And I'm like, you haven't been in Bali for a year and you're making a book? Like, what?
Girl, like, I know people who've been somewhere 6 weeks, they already books, and I'm like, you know nothing where you are. It would be like me moving to like LA, been there for 6 weeks, and say, y'all, I done found everything to know about LA, and that's not true, because I haven't even scratched the surface. Like, I haven't even scratched the surface.
Well, and that's the thing. Oh my goodness, my phone is about to die, and I don't know why. Let me figure this out. But that's the thing. I feel like you're not going in with community. So you are basically just around other expats who are also breaking the law and not paying taxes. That's why you feel so comfortable telling everybody else to pay taxes. And like, you are also saying, hey, you need to escape where you're moving to and come to this place. And I'm like, no. I'm a big believer for black people, Black Americans, to go out and see the world for themselves. But the thing is that no, like everywhere has anti-blackness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Bali is cool
Including
because of
black countries.
passport privilege for you, right?
Including black countries. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. Oh my goodness, my phone's gonna die. I don't know what to do. Okay, I'm
Can
gonna
you
figure
charge?
it out. I get my charger and it's like, no, don't want to work.
Oh no. Oh no.
This is how
Don't leave me here doing a solo. Shoot, I could talk for an hour to y'all. No.
I don't know what's gonna happen, y'all. I'm gonna try to figure it out, but we're gonna keep on going. Okay, we have everything is falling apart. Okay,
I said I'll do a live and just keep it talking, and you can join me. How about that? No.
Yeah,
No.
that might have to happen. Someone did put in a comment, and if you have any questions, put them in the question box so that
Yeah.
it'll ping me. But comments are cool in the comment section. Just they can go by really fast. 10 Days says, my father is Zimbabwean. My mother is Jamaican. I was born in Zimbabwe and stayed for 7 years and grew up in NYC. So maybe a cross-culture kid? Sounds like
Yeah. I saw that comment. I mean, I think you're technically a TCK and a CCK. Like I said, I fall in that category too. If you grew up with more than one culture in your household, you're definitely a cross-cultural kid. And then if you had some movement in that, you're definitely a third culture kid. So super cool.
I love it, but I feel like, as we were talking about before, I'm mad that it had to be a Black woman because there's a bunch of white people doing this. I'm mad. I really am. And y'all can
Christine.
tell me if you think it's ugly or not. I don't care. I'm mad because if you're in these international streets, you know white people do this kind of stuff, and it's just like, dang, I'm mad about it, but it's so problematic. And she's gonna get deported because Indonesians were like, oh, bet, let me screenshot this and send it to immigration. I was like, oh dear, oh
But,
oh dear.
but here's the more important part. It's the language of privilege, right? And so it's the language of privilege. I had a conversation a long time ago with someone who wrote for our site about how he had a situation. He'd seen a situation with the police, and it was a Black man in the Chinese police. He was living in, I want to say he was living in Beijing. But then they found out that the person that they were trying to arrest for no valid reason was an American. I remember he had a conversation with some of his peers who were Black Americans in that space. And I remember he turned to me and said, you know what? Some of the things I'm hearing are the same things that I would have said. And this was his term. This is no like judgment on my part, but I would have heard right wing or white Republicans say in the US, well, are you sure it was because of this? Are you sure it was because of that? Are you sure it wasn't this? And the thing that I had a conversation with him is that a lot of this is just power and privilege. Like, and yes, power and privilege is tied to skin color in a lot of places. And this is why we talk a lot, if you're in DEI work, so diverse, equity, and inclusion work, about white supremacy and all that other stuff. But a lot of it is just straight privilege, depending on what the privilege is aligned with. And so the fact that he was like shocked that these Black people who he thought would have noticed targeting, right, for whatever reason, because they came from the States, were saying the things that he would have found problematic in the States. I said, nah, because they're speaking through a Western privilege spot. And when you have privilege, that's the challenge, is that when you have a certain level of privilege, it's sometimes hard to see beyond that for how other people feel, right? And it does not matter. Like I said, privilege, as we know, yeah, it could be color, it could be gender, it could be religion, it could be being able-bodied, right? Because most of us, for example, do not think about the challenges for folks, for example, who have some sort of physical ailment or some sort of physical limitation. We don't think about it, right? Because it's not you will go through most of your days and never consider it, but that's a privilege. And so the problem is when we really do say check your privilege, we just assume, especially if we're coming from the US or from the West, it's easy to get down the racial, ethnic stuff, but we don't even touch on the other ways that we're privileged, and that these situations change depending on your geography.
That leads us into our next discussion, though, because, right, her perspective when she's a new expat or immigrant. I don't know what she's doing. She's whatever.
Right now she illegal, but anyway.
Illegal immigrant in Bali who's probably gonna get deported
Right.
because everybody knows her now and knows
Right.
not legally.
She had her photo too in the face. I'm like, oh, that's what she looked like. All right, well, you know.
And they know, I mean, Bali's not that big. They'll be like, have you seen this girl? Yeah, I know her. She's
black. So there you go.
I think so. This is a conversation because she's moving. She has her baggage of being a Black American, but also she's obviously blinded and doesn't understand her privilege as American. She has no idea. I think that's why she's so tone deaf and doing the things she's doing. So then let's talk about just the Black identity across diaspora, because I think this is also a really interesting conversation. Because in the thread on Twitter, the Indonesians were like, why are people saying, oh, but she's Black? They're like, what does that have to do with anything? And that's what the Indonesians said. They were like, why are you guys bringing this into it? Of course, some like right wing or whoever, probably Brits, who were like, oh, they always play the race card. It's like, shut up, Tom. You're not in this conversation. Okay. So, but the Indonesians were like, why are they talking about she's Black? She's illegal and she don't pay her taxes. Like, that's the beef that we have.
That's what we have.
Right? So this is the conversation on passport privilege, because I know all about Balinese immigration, but I'm assuming the fact that she can be in Bali for 6 months on tourist visa is directly attached to her American passport. I don't think they'd be giving that out to everybody. So let's talk about identity and privilege across the diaspora. And I want to say this, and I want to talk about this in this context, because I've had, and I'm going to continue to have, Black women across the diaspora who are talking about living and thriving abroad. They have different definitions of thriving. They have different ways of seeing the world. And I want to bring that to us because it's been such an education for myself. And I hope it's more of an education for all the listeners and watchers right now.
One of my personal privileges has been the fact that I've lived in the U.S. and I lived in Cameroon, right? And living in sub-Saharan Africa, and most of my family is West African. So I got this up close as a kid. Like I was the first one in my family born in the United States. So I'm the kid who didn't need a visa, but seeing my mom having to get a visa or having to get certain things because she was not an American citizen at that time. You're right. When we look at the world, and this is what I love about the stuff that we do on the Black Expat and even in the Global Chatter podcast, is that we talk about all these perspectives, right? In the case of this young woman, the fact that she could do that 6 months, I guarantee you, if she had a Cameroonian passport or a Nigerian passport, that probably would have not been the case, right? And too often, I think when we talk about Black travel, Black movement, because, for example, from an American perspective, our media reach is so large and is so accessible. So much is spoken that we tend to normalize experiences that are not necessarily the same for Black people across the world, right? Because let's be honest, there's a handful of countries that Black folks can be from where their passports have power.
Yeah,
that's where I'm going. No, I mean, there's a whole continent full of Black people and regions. But what I'm saying is there's a handful of countries where their passports have power, right? Because, great example. I mean, I could just pull from the podcast. Did an interview with a woman who's Jamaican. She has tried to come to the U.S. 5 times. They said, nope.
Wow.
So her and her husband, her Jamaican husband, they live in rural Japan. And Japan has been good for them. Right? I did an interview with 2 third culture kids, right? So if you were here early on, you heard me talk about the nuances of being a third culture kid. They grew up high mobility. One of them, their dad worked for the United Nations. So she lived in like 7 or 8 countries, intentionally in Africa though, because that's what her father wanted. And then the other one, her father, I believe was in oil and gas or maybe engineering, lived in Europe and in Africa, right? Grew up high mobility. They talked about specifically the fact that one of them has a Zimbabwean passport and the other one has a Senegalese passport. They cannot travel like in the ways that you and I can travel without the drama of it. And the funny part is that both of them went to international schools and, you know, have kind of been acculturated to the American way of sort of doing things. Not a single one of them has ever been to the US. And I remember having a conversation with one of them, and they said, you know what? I got tired of trying to stay in Italy, where I did my university degree after I was done. I got tired of being treated like I didn't want to contribute to society. So I've just decided now that I'm just going to travel places that are not going to be offensive about my passport. And so when we talk about Blackness and traveling and all these opportunities, we have to be very aware that it is not universal, because we say these statements as if they're universal. Sure, you can move to Bali, you can live this life, you could do whatever. The caveat should be if you're American, if you're Canadian, if you're Brit, if you're French. That should be the caveat. Because if you ask the folks that I talk to who are Tanzanian, Zimbabwean, Jamaican, right? Like, if you're asking Trini folks, man, they're going to tell you, yeah, that ain't really the case. But because we are so accustomed, I think, particularly from an American standpoint, of being very loud and being out there with our mindset, we don't even begin to think, you know what, there are a lot of people, this story is not going to work out for them the same way. It doesn't mean that the story won't work out, but they may got way more hoops to jump through. And I think I'm passionate about it because, once again, I'm a minority in my family. Most people in my family don't have American citizenship. So I see this stuff all the time. Like, I see it all the time. And I'm like, people don't even have, you don't even understand unless you come from a family where there's been that immigrant story. Then you kind of get the nuance of it.
Yes. Yes. I just think it's so, because I think, I think the thing is that being abroad and being Black has been really such an education for me. Meeting and discussing and having friendships with other Black women across the diaspora, understanding different, just different backgrounds and different passports and what you can and cannot do. I think it's been so interesting. But then also I think it's been really interesting to be confronted in my Americanness, where when I'm in America, I'm like, am I American? I don't know. But you leave and people are like, you're American.
You're American.
And they may not say it very nicely. They're like, so you're American. Oh, okay. And you're like, am I? Do I exude this? And do I smell American? And I think that's something we need to really, really examine. And I'll say this personally, because I think that we're very self-centered as a nation, and we come across that way. And I think that because we're Black American, we're like, but we can't possibly, and it's like, but we're still American. Like, we're still American. And it becomes problematic. I think it's also something that I love to talk about. We talked about this on your episode, but it was problematic when Black Americans want to go to the continent, return to the continent, repatriate, whatever they want to say. And I'm going to say the continent because usually people speak about it in generalities.
Right.
So I'll say the continent.
The motherland or fatherland, depending if you speak French, but yes.
Yeah, right. And they're like, oh, like in all the expat, Facebook groups, why are you trying to go to Europe? Why are you trying to go to Asia? Go to Africa. Just that. And you're just like,
just Joe.
Oh, okay. And like, you don't need anything. Everything is cheap. Da, da, da. Go to your people. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, the thing about being a Black American is I'm Black American and I'm Trinidadian, but I'm very much Black American. In my experience in America and living in Atlanta, we never made distinctions between West Indians or Africans, Nigerian. We were just like, we're all Black. We're all Black. You look like you have a little bit of Black in you, you're Black. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And then going to a space in which Blackness is not a thing because everybody's Black. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because I feel like a lot of Black Americans are setting themselves up for heartbreak. And I think it's because it's still self-centered. It's not community-centered. It's not, you know what I mean? To go to the continent and this be like, my people, and this be like, I don't know you.
Right. I have a story coming out in the next few weeks. Y'all, I still gotta write it, but I done the interview with a Black American woman who has been in Ghana for a long time, and we had a great conversation about this. And one of the things that she impressed on me is that when she leads groups and tours and all this stuff, I mean, she does a lot of other things. That one of the things that she's always noticed is that if you're a Black person who's coming to the continent for the first time, you're coming to Ghana, she has to sit down with you because there's a lot of stuff you have to unpack. There's a lot of stuff historically that has been shared, that has been planted. There's a lot of stuff emotionally that you kind of have to unpack, that sometimes you may not realize it until you are in a certain space. And so, you know, there's I forgot the famous spot, but where you go in Ghana and you kind of see the door kind of looking out to the ocean where the slave trade happened, and just the weightiness of that, right? And so she said, yes, there is a lot that has to happen. The thing about the continent is that you're right. We live in a highly racialized society. And so race is like the thing at the forefront. Now, I will make this caveat. Africa has totally been impacted by white supremacy. Don't anybody be fooled. It just looks different because of the way colonialism and everything happened. But it has been impacted, and there are things internalized, at least in the places that I have lived, that I can see as a direct result of European influence. That being said, when you're on the continent, like when people see me, they're not like, ooh, you're Black. Like, yeah, we all Black. What they want to know is who your people are. They want to know your tribe. They want to know who where is your soil from? Where's your ground from? Like, where are your roots? That's what they want to know. Because the way we relate to each other, and I knew this growing up as a kid, was by tribes. Like when people ask me where I was from, beyond the fact that they're like, obviously you should grow up in the US with a little accent, but it's like, where's your father from? Where's your mother from? And what I think can be super hard, and I think that's a pain point, and I get it, is when your people have been enslaved, right? Those bonds get broken. And so you come back and you want a heritage space, which is why a lot of people do visit the continent. And I think that's amazing. But then it's like the people on the continent in some spaces are like, well, you're American. Like, that's what we see first. Like, you're not from here. And I think that can be really hard depending on what community you go into, especially when you're trying to get that space and that community and that bond. Now, the beautiful thing I think of is when I see some really great, and I know some amazing folks that who have, I guess we'd call repatriated to the continent, where they have found the community that works for them. They've become part of that community, where the community starts to see them as part of it. And it isn't just, I'm here, it's all going to fall into place. But a lot of it has been a lot of work on both ends, right? So both the person who's moved there, as you would do in any place you moved in the world, as well as the receivers who said, yeah, that's my sister. Sure, she was from Boston, but you know what? She takes care, you know, she greets us every morning. Our kids play together. We have this community idea. I just think that it's very mistaken to think that depending on where you land, because 55 plus countries are also very different. And some people culturally are just a lot more open than others. I tend to think, this is me, I could be wrong, I tend to think West Africans tend to be a little bit more large and gregarious personality-wise. But that doesn't mean that you wouldn't get warmth in East Africa, for example. And I know plenty of people who've gotten that. It's just, it might be displayed differently. But I think you have to be really careful when you're going somewhere to have the expectations so romanticized, because we all looking for Wakanda. People on the continent are looking for Wakanda. Like, we all want it, okay? If we get a Wakanda Zamunda like crossover, it might be perfect. But you know, we try to work with what we got. Trying to work it, man. Whew.
I love that. I love that. I had to turn off my ring light because that was the issue. Now my phone will die. So no glamour.
Glow is gone, girl.
No glamour for you people. Sorry. I would love to hear comments. What do you guys think about everything we've talked about third culture kid, cross culture kids, about the woman in Bali and how she's gonna probably be deported soon?
And whew,
And about Black identity across the diaspora. If you have any experiences, let us know in the comments below. I think I have seen some people saying something. Um, Eric says, so important. I don't know if do people say BIPOC? It's also a term that I don't really like, but that's a
Okay,
whole.
so y'all don't judge me. Every time I see BIPOC, first I'm like, oh, bisexual POCs, okay. And then biopic, I'm like, who we doing a movie about? And I'm like, wait a minute.
And I'm not picking up, Eric. I appreciate you being here and I appreciate your conversation. I'm not picking on you. It's just like one of those things I'm like, so Black, Indigenous, people of color folks many times don't understand intersectionality as just describing it. Yeah. But and the thing is that I think the reason why, particularly like Western people of color, Indigenous people, or I'll say American mostly, like Americans, we don't understand it because it's so racialized that all nuances are taken away. They're stripped apart.
No,
That's part of what's being done. And so then you're like, but this is what it is. And it's like, no, we have layers. There's lots of things going on, right?
Which is why, I mean, we do it in the States where like the Black community. I mean, y'all, let's be honest. Black people in the South and Black people in North Carolina, where I am right now, are different from Black people in Oakland, California, from Chicago, from New York, from Houston. But because we have made Black such a general term, we do strip away the nuance because we never say truly, when we look at white folks, for example, we don't assume that a white Swiss person and a white French person and a white Brit and a white Belgian are similar, right? We don't assume, we just know that they're white, but we don't assume that their experiences are the same. But then we get to Blackness and it's like Black people from all these places, because look how big the US is. Then you start to extrapolate, like Black Canadians. I have conversations all the time with Black Canadians because, you know, first of all, people are like, they're Black people in Canada. I'm like, they're there, but you, they're there. They're there. They're holding it down. They are there. But they have their own nuanced stories, right? And you get to Europe and you get into the islands and you get to the continent and you get to Asia. I was doing reading on Black Turks and it blew my mind because I never thought of Black people being in Turkey. And then I was like, ooh, there's a whole history.
I was just in a Clubhouse chat yesterday with a woman who, she lives in Turkey. I guess her husband is Turkish. And she was talking about the Black community in Turkey. And she's like, yes, expats and it's Africans. And she's like, and there's Black Turks. And she just told us the story, like the whole history. I was like,
people were like, Black Turks?
I was like, huh.
Because Black people, once again, this is why the Black expat exists. Black people have been moving since the beginning of time. I have said that since the beginning of the site. It didn't just start and move with like enslavement. Like Black folks have been moving for forever. And the other thing, because I know we've got a pretty diverse audience, that I always say, and I love this last quote, that not all Black people have the same experience or the same, just like white folk, is this. You know, all the stuff that happened last year, particularly with the social unrest stemming from, well, not stemming from, but sparked by the George Floyd murder. Mm-hmm. You know, I start to see a whole lot of stories and a lot of people are approaching me about more Black Americans moving abroad because of racism.
Oh, girl, I hate this.
And I was like, this is why the Black expat exists, because you always center the Black movement story in relation to what white folks are doing. And it also is always a story centered around pain and struggle, right? So when you see Black stories of movement, it's racism, it's poverty if they're from a third world country, it's some kind of war or suffering, right? Whereas I said I got Black folks who move because they're diplomats, they are business folks, they wanted to learn German, they fell in love with a French man. You know what? They decided Buenos Aires was the best place in the world. It's not necessarily or only racism why Black people move, because really it's similar to the same reasons predominantly white folks move. Opportunity, love, they love the country, they love the culture. But why does every story have to be centered around pain and struggle instead of just, once again, I really, really, really like croissants and I wanted to live in Paris.
Come on with the French accent. Yes. Yo, tell me, this is why I was so angry this summer about the media coverage and how I kind of get
It was
Black
terrible.
movements, like the people who kind of just broad brush with a side eye, because I'm like, why
Terrible.
Fortune magazine all of a sudden now profiling all of these top execs of these multinational Black people who are living in Switzerland, London, all around Europe, and centering it around racism. Now let me say, you can experience racism no matter what your tax bracket is, but honey, do you think they moved to Switzerland to be a CMO because of racism in the fucking United States?
Right.
Like,
Right.
it's
Right.
like
And,
really,
and you're right, because that was an otherwise really good article, and it was
it's
actually,
just an article.
and it was one of the few. It was one of the few where that wasn't the only, like, you know what I mean? Like, you're talking about these Black execs, right? But I get asked all the time, when you run a site called the Black Expat, everybody named Mama was like, can we talk about Black people who are running from, racism? And and if I'm willing to do the interview, I always keep saying, Black people don't just move because of racism. And then people go, really? And I'm like, yeah, I know plenty of people who wanted to do a master's in Europe because it was cheaper. Like, this should not be a strange concept. And this is why I think you have a podcast. This is why I got the Global Chatter, which, by the way, y'all, new season starts on the 26th. I'm super excited because last season was crazy, but the folks I got this season, I think I might kick it off with White Expat Privilege. It's a two-parter with one of my expat friends and white saviorism. So you may want to.
Ooh, that's gonna be
You may want
good.
to check it out. Global Chatter, we're on all the platforms because I'm Black, so I got to plug. But anyway, part of the reason why the Black Expat exists, your podcast exists, my podcast exists, and some of the people that we know, someone like Tiffany Smith and the work that she's doing. And even in the travel space, when you look at the Black Travel Alliance, I just, had a great conversation with a member of that board, is that we are trying to show, hey, let's normalize why Black people, wherever they are, right? Wherever they are. And I know that the folks that I named are American, but I got a whole host of people who are Black, who are on the continent, who are elevating stories, who are in Europe, who are elevating stories, who are in Latin America, who are elevating stories. Because if we don't own these conversations and push back, it will continue to be centered around pain. This is why I think when you see there's a complaint sometimes with Hollywood movies, right? That sometimes you just want a love story. Like Love Jones was amazing. It don't always have to be 12 Years a Slave. Like, sure, tell the history, but it don't always have to be around some kind of struggle, particularly from a white gaze. Because the truth of the matter is,
Because they love their porn. It's weird.
when people ask me about the Black expat, I said I started it. I didn't consider anybody else. I just considered Black people. It's not centered on white experience. It's not centered on an Asian experience. It's not centered on any other thing, unless you have a Black identity. Like, it is completely centered on the different experiences of the different types of Black people. And I'm cool with that. If you follow the site and you're not Black, guess what? Half the time you learn something because you go, I didn't even know. And people have been very respectful, and I've been very fortunate that way. Like, folks who are not Black have been like, I love this. This is cool. I've learned something. But there is nothing about our site that is focused on the perspective in relation to whiteness, because I'm not white. So yeah. I'm not gonna put something, and there's nothing wrong with being white. It's just that it's not my perspective. This was to normalize it. And there is a reason why when you go on the site, people ask me, this is so funny. Early on, we were fortunate to be featured in the Wall Street Journal, which I can say now. So I can say this now, y'all. Let me tell you how trippy this was. 3 weeks prior, I called my best friend and said, oh my gosh, the Wall Street Journal got this expat space, but everybody that they're featuring is white. Like, why they always got white people? And my best friend said, well, consider the audience. And then the Wall Street Journal called me like 2 weeks later, and I was so glad I didn't rant on social media about how white they were. But here's the deal. Like, when I started it and I looked at it, I just thought to myself, I just need a space where we can have these kind of conversations that you and I are having, because if we aren't having those conversations, an outside group is not going to care about them because it may not be their issue.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was really important that like even when you open the site on the desktop, we have very big photos of Black people. And that's the number one question I get outside of the name is, where do I find all these Black people?
Which, where they live at? Like, what's going on?
Okay, well, like where do you find all these Black expats? I'm like, they're all around you. But the other part is that people are like, oh my gosh, I realized I've never go to an expat site and it's like 99%. Honestly, it's like 100% just Black people. And so the site for the person who's asking is The Black Expat. So www.theblackexpat.com, or you can follow us on Instagram and you can get there.
Amanda, you see, this is why we connected, because when I started my podcast, I had been stalking people for a while. Because it's like that show on Netflix. I have never watched it, but I assume I've seen a lot of, pop culture stuff. I'm like that person, whatever.
Yeah.
I was talking a lot of people that I wanted to interview on for the podcast. And when I finally got to chat with you, we just resonated because this is what is needed. We can't wait for someone else to tell our own stories, because if they ever get around to doing it, they're going to mess it up.
They're going to do it wrong.
Right? They're going to mess it up. And we have so much to say, and there's so much nuances in our experiences that we have enough material. We have enough audience. We have enough content. We don't need like white people and their gays. If you are here and you're white, cool, that's fine. But know that Amanda's platform centers Blackness. My platform centers white Black women.
Does it though?
There's no white women there. But it centers Black women and the stories, and that shouldn't make you feel uncomfortable. It shouldn't make them feel whatever. Regardless if it doesn't matter, we're to keep on going because that's what we're gonna do. Okay.
I mean, I will say this. What's funny when I do speaking engagements is, if it's related to the Black expat, folks will go, "Oh my gosh, you're the Black expat." And I'm like, actually, there are millions of them. I am just.
You're the one.
I'm not even expatting right now, so I'm not even one. And I just love the beauty of the stories you're telling and the stories that I get to feature both in the podcast, once again, the Global Chatter, and on our site, because I laugh so much. You're probably I feel like half the podcast is me laughing, which I can't edit that out. But like, even what's coming up the next couple of weeks, like, I got Black people who are British. I got, Black folks who are American but living somewhere else. I'm super excited for this woman that I met in Sudan, or not in Sudan, who is in Qatar, who is Sudanese and a graffiti artist. And I'm like, the revolution will be painted, man. Like, just the stories that people tell and the beauty of it. And so I love the fact that people are even want to listen to us chat, because I would have this conversation whether y'all were listening or not, if you know me. I would talk to one person about all of this, but I'm glad that people are really receiving it.
I love this too. If you guys have lived abroad and you want to tell us about it, let us know in the comments. If you have any questions about living abroad, anything that we've discussed, please put it in the question box below. We have one comment here from Miss B Get Knowledge. All right, Miss B. I went to Saudi Arabia in 2012, and we need a point of view from our gaze. I want to go abroad again, and I want content from a Black point of view. Yes, and you came to the right place.
Yeah. Oh, and I, as someone who's lived in the Gulf, man, I think that, there's a lot you can write, especially depending on where your Blackness comes from in relation to being in those countries. There's some good, and there's some, okay, this is a little unnerving, to, oh damn. Like, there's a spectrum of things, and I, man,
can we talk about that?
I'll write about it.
Can we talk about because this kind of has to go back to the Bali thing, I think. I don't know if she's aware of her privilege because I don't know her.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are Black Westerners that are aware of their privilege and they lean right into that. There's like, yup, me and mine. And there's other people like me who's like very uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
with passport privilege. Um,
I had a hard time.
like,
I had a hard time to a certain degree in Doha. So when I was in Doha, I mean, my hair's in braids now, but I had a shaved head. I mean, I had like, my hair was like that long. And, you know, you see me, I'm a dark skinned woman. I present West African, or at least African as far as I'm concerned. And when, when I travel to a lot of places, people are still shocked that I'm American, even though I clearly have this nondescript American accent. And I remember being in line one time waiting for something, and this guy just cut me, like I'm in line. He just came and stood in front of me like he was going to be next. And I said, "Excuse me," really loud. And he jumped back and looked and was like, "American?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "I'm sorry." And he got behind me. Now, I'm looking at him like, you did that because you probably assumed I was West African or African. You probably assumed that I may not necessarily be in one of the higher positions. Like I was there for a really great position. And you probably may have assumed I was even in the service industry. And so you thought it was okay until you realized I was not what you thought it was. And
yeah,
I just saw some scenarios where it was very clear. And let me be clear, it wasn't just with sub-Saharan Africans, right? I saw it also with folks coming from Nepal, Bangladesh, Philippines, you know, so our global South brethren, and definitely the darker end of the of the chain, right? And it's hard because once again, remember, I'm first gen American. So some things are just not comfortable. Like it's not, it will never, and I hope it stays that way for me. It should never be comfortable for me to lean into that privilege because I am too close to people who don't have that privilege that I don't ever want to, like, I don't want to forget that. But if you, at the same time, if you come from a space where you've never had a lot of privilege and your humanity recognized and the power, and then you step into it, like, I know we would all like to believe, especially if you are Black American and you grew up in the US in particular, and you've dealt with some of the things you've dealt with, if there have been challenges, you would like to believe, okay, if I go somewhere else, I'm not going to do the same thing that I had people do to me. But you don't really know until you are presented with the opportunity.
yeah,
And so, but I know that for me in the Gulf, there's such a stratified when it comes to, I don't want to call it a case system, but when it comes to nationality, it's not necessarily tied to race, although there could be some elements of it, but there's such a stratification with nationality and the perception of that, that there are some things that even when I hear people talking about living in the Gulf, I'm like, ooh, you so Western, like you are talking, and I'm like, I could tell you stuff. But I lived there. You went on vacation to Abu Dhabi.
okay, well, that's a whole different conversation. Talk about travel,
Sorry, like that was a side rant for.
living, because people will be like, I've traveled to, and I'm like, you haven't lived.
You have traveled through for 5 days. 5 days. 7 days. I don't care. You wore your white, you got out on a boat, you took the photos, you look glamorous, y'all are drinking your champagne. I can see the stuff behind you. It's all good. I ain't hating on that. I love a good vacation too. But I wouldn't begin to pretend, just like when we look at that young woman who was in Indonesia. I was like, ma'am, if we ask queer people who live in Indonesia, are they gonna say what you saying because you saying this is a safe haven? And I'm like, people might get executed. You you need to be careful talking your stuff when you haven't actually been part of a place. And so I think that's my hard part. My hard part are the folks who just travel somewhere and don't necessarily really know someone from there who can give them the authentic, even if you're not staying there, who can give you the authentic, here's the other side of it, just so you know. Just as the way as Americans, we hate when people come in and say, America is perfect. It's all this stuff. I don't know why y'all are complaining. Like, if you just did that, whatever. It gets on your nerves too, right? Okay. So, like,
I mean, it gets on my nerves when people see, like, we had an insurrection. They're like, especially here in Spain, they're like, yeah, but I still want to move to America. How do I move to America? And I'm like, leave me alone. Leave me alone.
by the way, I think some of my friends are on. I sure as hell texted some of my friends who I grew up with abroad and said, yo, they've stormed the Capitol, so we know what a potential coup might look like. So who ready to bounce? Because all these Americans are just like, is it an insurrection? And I'm like, this, if you grew up in a politically unstable country, like this stuff, like trigger, like, and I'm not gonna lie, it was triggering from crap, is this gonna happen here? I see we've got some questions. Yeah, some people don't want authentic, they want to live their dream. That's my girl. Yeah, no, she's totally right. Hirut's totally right. You want the dream. It's just like, let me go to Paris. I'm gonna take all these photos in front of the Eiffel Tower. This is amazing. And what you don't understand is French bureaucracy is hell. So, so like, you don't live there.
And the tension between Black Americans, particularly, and Black French, and people don't like to talk about that.
Episode on the podcast.
You see what I'm saying?
If you guys don't,
we could talk for 5 hours because this is. But I want to get through these questions, and I have something in particular I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Let me just go. Okay. Hey, Dahlia. I struggle with privilege here in Mexico. See, that's the thing. Everywhere you go. I was in the Army. Cool Chick 88 says, I was in the Army and lived in South Korea for a year and Germany for 3 years. Of those countries, Germany was the most diverse and felt most comfortable. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can see that.
Janelle McBride says, that's so different. I'm a New Yorker. I live in Florida. Living there and being on vacation is two different vibes and opportunities. That's the thing.
Florida is its own country, though.
I used to live in Miami. And so when people like to be like, oh, you know, Barcelona is like Miami. I'm like, no, it's not. What the hell are you talking, girl? No, it's what are you literally talking?
I haven't been to Barcelona, but I've been to Spain and I've been to Florida. I don't know.
Nowhere in Spain is like Miami. Like, what are you talking about? People crazy. People just be saying things. I'm just like, y'all gotta stop saying words. You gotta stop.
One of these days, this has nothing to do with anything, but it just reminded me, I should tell you the crazy things people say to me when I'm traveling, because I used to write a whole book when people try to compare stuff from the States to wherever country we're in. And I'm looking at them like, no, I will say this because this is still one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard of. I was on a flight back from Italy. I've been in Tuscany, by the way, recommend. But once again, Tuscany, amazing to visit. Italy, don't want to live there. But I was on the flight sitting next to this young white guy. We were, this is out of Rome. We were flying to the UK on British Airways. And I said, so how did you like the food in where you were in Italy? How did you like it? And he said, to my face, you know what? It was nothing special. It wasn't like anything I couldn't have gotten at the Olive Garden. Now,
if y'all, anyone who is Italian or Italian adjacent who maybe
or who has a palate.
That's not an opinion that's held by all Americans. Let's just say that.
It's not the thing is, it's not even the craziest thing I've heard about food is, look, I got a story from Argentina that rivals that one. But anyway, yes, let's answer the questions. I'm sorry, y'all, because I could talk all day.
The flight risk says, where are you, ladies? I'm currently in Barcelona.
And I am in the sexy, exotic location of Raleigh, North Carolina.
Janelle says, I understand being on vacation in the UK is quite different than having a job as a Black woman in the UK. It is. Yes, Fort Lauderdale. As a black BK Duchess of Success. Oh, hey, you have been here in some of my IG lives before. I appreciate you. As an American, I've always wondered why people still want to move to America. Each their own. Being on vacation anywhere is different than actually living there. Two different experiences. Yes. And then we have one more question that I want to ask you. Okay, we definitely stood out. You are correct. I did experience a bit of American privilege. I'm proud to say some of that was related to, I don't really know how to work IG. Well, so
I
let
am
me.
touching nothing because I've never done this before.
I'm like, I'm trying to say some of that was related to our president at the time got several. I don't know how to make it larger. I don't know, y'all. I'm sorry, but thank you for. Thank you. Sorry, I don't know. I'm sorry, and I don't got my glasses on, so I'm trying to be cute. It's the whole issue. But I wanted to ask you something. That's to do with if you guys have been listening to the podcast, I just dropped an episode this week on dating abroad. It was a compilation of past, I think it was about 14 past guests and all about their dating abroad experiences. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do it again because I ask everyone this question. And it was a tart episode. Like I put it together and I listened to it and I was like, oh, this is kind of tart. This is like, people might be like, oh yeah, dating abroad. And you'll press play and you'll be like, what?
Right.
But it's true, right? It's a true experience for these women. So I would love, if you're comfortable, to talk about your experience dating abroad, or if you have any stories from your podcast guests or anything like that about dating abroad.
I think I can do both just from the folks that we've had on as well as when I lived in Qatar. So I think it's a hot mess, like specifically when I was living in the Gulf. And let me frame why this was a hot mess, okay? So you got to have to understand the expats that are there. So Qatar, like UAE, right? It's something like 85% foreign, okay? 85% foreign, because so many foreign workers come in both for labor and for like white collar jobs, right? So on top of that, and this is actually the most uncomfortable experience I've had in my entire life as a woman, it is disproportionately male. So we're talking like 60%, it might be higher, because of people coming in to work. And I remember my sister came to visit me and we had gone to UAE for a weekend and came back. We were standing in immigration in the airport and literally crowds of people all in line. We were one of 5 women. So if you've ever been, right, and then we're Black, and then people don't know personal space. I'm standing there like, this is my nightmare. People up in my space. I am one of very few women, and then we stand out. And so one of the things that was a challenge is, my friends and I would talk this all the time. There would be guys who were married, wife would be back in the UK. Look, I had a friend, this happened to her because I just like, I'm not dealing with this. She was dated a guy for 3 weeks, made her dinner, told her one night, hey, I have something to tell you. I have a wife and 3 kids.
That's not, I have something to tell.
And the number of guys who, because partners were out of the country, the number of people who have people somewhere else, I was like, this is not cool. I remember the one guy who, he was Qatari, who led with, you know, my ex-girlfriend or ex-wife or whatever is Black. And I'm like, what does that have to do?
Like, we had a bunch on the podcast too, being like, I just want to try a Black girl. Like, this is, I don't know, this is a carousel.
Because he had a kid with her. He's like, you know, like basically essential. My baby mama is Black. And I'm like, but are you looking for another one? Like your baby mama? Like, what does it have to do with me? Like, this ain't got to do with me. There was one guy, I swore up and down, he had a wife that he wasn't talking about. Like, he was from Atlanta, and I was like, you look suspect. And so,
don't do my city like that. I mean, it's right. Don't do it like that.
No, but you from Atlanta. Like, I didn't need to go across the world to meet an Atlanta man being very Atlanta. Like, and so the craziness. So I want to say personally, I feel like the Gulf is hard just because of what you're dealing with. Now, I've talked about dating with folks who've been on the Black expat, particularly from both the female and male side. A lot of the women who said, man, it really depends what country you're in, because I know Black women, and I'm talking specifically Black women, had a hard time in Southeast Asia because, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I did a story with a woman in Colombia, And Black and white women were stressed out because sex tourism is a thing. And
yeah.
so it didn't matter what everybody who came down there would want a Colombian woman, because obviously there's a certain physical type, that stereotype, and a certain cultural stereotype, right? In terms of assuming that she would be a little bit more docile and submissive. And we did a whole conversation about how she knew dudes who were in long-term relationships with people, they didn't speak Spanish, and the woman didn't speak English, and they were making it work, you know, because once again, they're coming from Western nations. And so it is, I'm telling you all the scary stories, but then I also have people who are love pats, who fell in love with someone. Like, and I have someone who's coming up a couple of weeks on the podcast who their story, you know, he's Nigerian Brit, she's Black American, fell in love in London, they've been married, they're amazing, and it does work. But it is, I think one of the challenges, particularly if you're Western, is who's trying to be with you for you. If you are a more outspoken or very clear about your rights, can they handle that? Who's trying to get a visa, right? And who got 3 to 4 kids with their wife, possibly back in the village that they have not told you about, back in Nairobi. So you got all these things that you got to juggle. And then that's not even getting to a man or a woman who understands your cultural perspective, your life perspective, or your whatever. And so, wait a minute. Hold on. Did I just say, or better yet, let's talk about those with fake accents saying they from fans, but really from New Jersey. You know what?
We can't judge this as fans. Ma'am. Scammers everywhere.
We should have a whole crazy panel. I know some people I could put on that. It wouldn't help a damn person, but it'd be hilarious.
Let me tell you, you know what? Tiffany Smith from Abroad Education, she was actually really transparent because she had like a love scam, and she did a whole episode on her podcast about it.
I haven't heard it yet.
I listened to it, and I was literally on the edge of my seat. I was like, Tiffany, your podcast is already amazing, but you're a storyteller, girl. Because I was just like, what?
These dudes, man. And you know what? Let me not get twisted, because there's some women out here too that are who are a little crazy. So let me not just say it's the men. I'm just saying some of the lines they're dropping. I'm like, y'all, especially if we from the same country. Like, you forgot. You've been out here too long, and you thought I couldn't pick up on the BS. Like,
it's so much. It's so much. It's ridiculous. It's cultural differences. It's people who just have different standards. And as Black women, it's just really interesting because there is this umbrella of fetishization that's been perpetrated in the media and music. And so they're like, people are like, so and the podcast guest, she's from Jamaica. She lives in Japan. She's brilliant. She's an introvert, and she's an architect. And people still be like, you say you're from Jamaica, but like, you don't really seem Jamaican. And she's like, because she needs to be like, I don't know, like whining all the time. She needs to be dance hall. Like, she needs to be the light of the party. And she's like, no, you know. And then she encounters, and her friends encounter in Japan, you know, men who are like, because Japan has a really interesting culture. She was telling me about. She's like, Japanese, when they get a hobby, they're like, I'm mastering it. So if it's like the violin, or if it's like, I want to be a dance hall king or queen, they're like, I'm going to do that.
Right.
And part of that appropriation at that point is also getting a Black partner to like do the thing. They do it all the way in Japan, right? They don't half step in Japan.
Right. We had that in the story. We had a Black woman in Japan talk about that. She said, yeah, there are some scenarios where she was like, am I just a Black friend? You know how he was like, I have a Black friend, like, you the Black friend for real? Like, they really were going all the way with it. But I think the other part, like you said, fetishization, you know, I feel this is why I'm very careful even with our site. Like, I don't do the top 10 places to find a man or to find a woman because I just hate those stories. You strip people of who they are and try to say, well, this is the country where you're going to, because I've seen some of this with, there's some adjacent Black male travel expat sites where it's like, oh, you can find, you know, women who live here. These women are better than American women or whatever. And I'm just like, you just don't want no woman to call you out on your stuff. So you go find a woman who doesn't speak the language that you do or speak it as well, doesn't have the same power dynamic, right? Or, you know, fit some kind of fantasy, but isn't, because you come from a higher class because you have more money and you're seen as American and all this other stuff. Sure, you're being elevated. But if you were back in the States, ain't nobody checking for you like that. And I had a woman say that on the podcast being in Vietnam. She's like, she talked about all these, I hate to say it, white men who were with these Vietnamese women. And I was like, you know what? This is the other side of what I had someone see in Colombia where, you know, I don't, you know, feminism has gotten these women out west and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you know what? People just want to be treated well, though. Like, I don't understand why that is so political.
And there are a lot of them in the military, and they're on their third, fourth wife, and they're max. They got burned. They got paid alimony, child support. They don't want to do that. And now they just trying to go. We got to talk about that offline. But anyway, we got
so, y'all gonna need the secret line for that one. That's
because that one is real, and I also think there's some online psychological group think stuff that happens, and I'm like, it's real weird. So that's the thing. That's also why your site and your platform is so important, because Black expat, that's a huge umbrella. There's a lot of people who are Black expats and they're a bunch of weirdos, but there's also normal people.
Weird too. So weird. Like, okay, you have to be slightly weird to be like, all right, I'm gonna move across the world. Whatever, I accept that.
You know,
people where I'm like, yo, are you just trying to collect an experience? Like, or are you trying to run away from something where you left, right? So you literally like, I can't be whatever I want to be in wherever country I'm in, so I'm going to run somewhere else. Yeah, but there are some weirdos out there that I'm like, I need you to just steer clear, man. Steer clear. I can't. I cannot with you.
And to what your point was, going back to Bali, I interviewed several women. You probably know them. I interviewed Nubia and Francis of the Chronicles Abroad podcast. Their podcast is centered towards like Gen Xers who are traveling, living abroad. And I brought them into the Dating Abroad podcast because they're both Black women who are 40 plus, and they also identify as lesbian, as queer. And that's what's also so crazy about this Bali thing, because they were like, because I asked them very specifically, I was just like, what is the real deal? Because people need to know. And they were both very adamant with, look, there's some places that you can go and you can live in all of your identity. And there are other places where you just can't. And trying to resist it will get you killed and will give you problems. And they were just like, and it's not worth it for us. And so I want, if anyone does identify or is interested in learning more about that, they talk about that, and they talk about places in which they found where they are comfortable and where they think that they can live in their full expression. But yeah, Indonesia, they didn't say anything about Indonesia or Bali. So that was also what it was like, what y'all talking about? Like,
yeah. No, I'm just, here's my advice for anyone who's looking to just go abroad. I'm asked constantly, where's the best place for Black people to live? And I'm actually writing an article on this. Where's the best place for Black people to live? Guess what? There is no best place that's one fit for all of us, because if you're straight and in a what people call traditional marriage or whatever, you may not have problems in one place, but if you're queer, you may. If you are able-bodied, another person may have issues. Like if you speak the language but someone else doesn't, they may have issues. You're right. It's down to safety and what is priority for your situation. What makes sense to you? That's why I'm cool with Black expats who are like, no, I'm not looking at Africa. I want to look at Europe. If Europe is going to let you be your best self, why should I have some misguided notion that you should go to an African nation, right?
Like it's not specific one, just like the continent. I was like,
right. Where people are like, go to Africa. At the same time, if Antigua is going to be, you know, your best life, why am I going to say, no, you should go to Japan? Because people make decisions that fit their circumstances and their situation. And that's the thing. No matter where you're getting advice from, if a place don't make sense for you at that time or at all, don't feel any guilt about it. Go what makes sense for you. Which is why I got a Jamaican family in rural Japan, and they're the only Black people, and they are thriving.
I think, see, that goes back to, I think, accountability and intentionality. Knowing what you're wanting from experience, and also knowing that I am the cultivator of that experience. I got to know who I am and where I want to go, which may not be what people think you should do. So you actually just need to be yourself. And even though that sounds easy to say, people still have issues really fully claiming themselves. And I'm like, if you're going to go through the hassle of being an expat, please.
Girl. It's Instagram, though.
What you want to do.
It's Instagram and social media effect, though. Like back in the day, you remember everybody else used to do this before you took a photo, right? So it's been happening. I think that when you make the declaration you're going to be an expat, especially if you come from a family where people don't move, everyone's like, oh my God, you're doing this thing that no one else has done. And then there's this expectation of the glamour and all the great stuff around it. But people sometimes don't even think about, like, the excitement is there. But I always say, well, what happens if a move don't work out? What you gonna do? Like, do you have a plan? Because you done sold all your stuff. So like, are you coming back? And then people sometimes are scared, like, well, if I come back and I told all these people I was never coming back, what does it say about me? And I'm like, but
that's the thing. You can go back if you want to. Like, you can. Or you can say, this doesn't work out, I'm going to flip it to somewhere else. But see, that's when you're in control, like when you are really intentional, then it doesn't really matter the outside voice. Because you're like, yeah, this didn't work out, but I'm not going back home. So we're going to flip it out. We're going to make it work. Like, or you're going to, who cares?
I had a contact who told me she was stressed out because she watched someone moved. I think they moved maybe to Mexico. They were given all this advice.
Ooh, I'm so mad about it.
They've been there like 90, 120 days. They hadn't been there long. All this advice. And it didn't work out. And they were like, I need to come back. And I'm like, but how were you giving advice, but you were still in the honeymoon stage and hadn't even really figured out? And then I also thought to myself, see, it was easy for you to run back to the border because it was the U.S. If you've been in Bali, though, you might have figured some stuff out because that airfare is not cheap. But once again, like, yeah, it is amazing how much external pressure people also put around themselves when it comes to living abroad. When, honestly, if you treat this the same as if you were going from, like, Jersey to Chicago, you might be like, it's still a move. It's still a time zone change. It's not, you still need planning. Like, think about it that way. Don't just get caught up in, oh my gosh, I'm going to take all these photos and I'm going to do this and I'm going to have this amazing French experience. No, all you're doing is carrying your drama and your trauma and your bags to a different time zone.
Preach, man. Put that on a t-shirt. Put that on a t-shirt.
Counselor, I say this crap all the time. That's all it is. All it is. You dragging your ish across different time zones and hitting people upside the head with it until you figure out that you need counseling or therapy or you need to fix yourself.
Thank you.
And living abroad does not fix your problems. I'm sure we're over time.
Preach.
It doesn't matter. I mean, if your problem is police brutality, I get that. I get that. Although, as we have seen across the planet, there is still some drama with that, right? But like, most of your problems, like, you have to sit and really work them out. Yes. And either you're going to work it out where you are, or work it out somewhere different, or work it across the planet. But don't think that if you have low self-esteem issues, or you have problems with your family, or that you can't handle a budget, that you moving across the world is going to fix that. Because if you can't handle money in your country, you're not going to handle money in a different country. If you don't get along with your family wherever you live right now, it's not magically going to get better. Like, you may sometimes have to cut people off, and that's valid. But don't just assume that you know, new me, new life. I'm like, no, same you, different
There's
time zone.
still
That's
work
all it is.
to be
That
done.
should be on a t-shirt. Same you, different time zone. I'm good for quotables.
That's a t-shirt. Go ahead, do that. Trademark that. That's from the Black expat.
Like, right.
That is so true. And that's what I tell people as well. I said, anywhere you go, you bring yourself, and then you want to blame Colombia. You want to blame Rwanda.
Colombia's terrible. Not
And,
sis, you are. Like,
and
you
Rwanda, like, I was just sitting here minding my own business, sis. Like, you came to me. Like, it's, you know what I mean? It's like, it's you. And a lot of people don't hear that. Living abroad, I think, does create a space for people who are intentional to say, okay, I'm in a space where perhaps I don't have to deal with police brutality. I don't have to deal with my family. They're not all up in my face. And maybe I don't have some of these societal constraints or assumptions, but you still have you, and you still have to be clear. I always tell people, you need to do a list, an inventory. What are the issues? What are the issues that you're having in your life? How much of that is environmental? How much of that is you? Start working on it, because maybe living abroad does give you the space, maybe give you the resources to work on it, but just moving doesn't do anything. It's work. You have to cultivate, literally work the soil to get the issues out, work the soil to build community, work the soil to actually have a life well lived, not an Instagrammable life, a life that you're like, this is that shit. I like this.
and
And people don't know that.
you know the number one area that the cracks show up immediately. Well, I'm going to say two. You know the two areas that show up immediately when you move abroad, like within a certain time frame. Number one, if you and your partner have a whack relationship.
Preach.
Because no, the number of people that I know got divorced. No, because all of a sudden you no longer in Cleveland. Okay, you in Beijing. China's stressing you out, and so number one relationship. And the other area that always shows up is money, because once again, whatever your relationship is with money, if you do not know how to handle it, let me tell you something fascinating. Part of the reason people move out to the Gulf, right, if you're a Westerner, these jobs, especially if you're engineering, teaching, whatever, you can make more money. This is why some people move, right? You do all the sacrifice. One of the things, though, about living in Doha and UAE or whatever is that the standard of living, like the cost of living, is ridiculous, right? So when I was out there, people would brunch on Friday. I think it would be Friday. It's like $200 per person, because it's only happening at like the Ritz-Carlton or whatever, right? And you could get alcohol. Remember, these are dry countries, right? So, but it's like all day brunch. You'd be there for 5 hours just doing your thing. If you're doing that every week, because you just hanging out, you know, you taking your family, your partner, whatever, and you ain't good with money, you can start to see yourself spending and spending and spending on all these experiences. There are great experiences to have in Abu Dhabi. There are great experiences to have in Dubai. There are great experiences to have in Doha, but they're expensive. If you don't think about your budget, girl, you realize real quickly you may have lived out there 10 years and saved nothing.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that.
No,
Don't.
I mean, and HBSC actually did an article where they had all these British expats who came back. And they found out something like 40% of them had nothing for retirement. They had been out there 5, 10, 15 years on these high-end salaries, because let me tell you about the Gulf. You can keep up with the Joneses. Like, y'all don't understand. I was balling and I was not making like that serious money. I remember the people that I knew, it was so crazy. We would be there and go, you know what? Where do I want to go this weekend? And I remember when this was before Christmas, my family was flying out from the States. We were going to Seychelles. By the way, shout out Seychelles. If y'all have never been, yo, if you can get there. And I decided I needed a vacation before my 2-week vacation to an island nation with my family. So I went to Singapore for a week. So I went to Singapore, flew back to Doha for 24 hours, and then flew to Seychelles. Like, what I mean, you could ball. You could ball in those countries. But the thing is, when you start to look at your numbers, if you're not good with money, all of those things become very clear. And so, yeah, you move to another country. Sure, they're paying you 6 figures, but if you don't know how to handle it, You might as well once again stayed in Cleveland.
Yo. And quick plug here. Check out the Flourish and the Foreign YouTube channel. I just did a YouTube channel video with Aquania Escarnet, who's also a fellow expat, 3-time expat U.S. diplomat, was in Ecuador, UAE, and Haiti. Also podcaster. The purpose
UAE.
of
Wow, okay. Sorry, you said UAE and Haiti. I was like, that's a difference. That's a difference.
Yeah. I'm going to have her on the podcast too, so it'll be interesting to talk about. But we just talked about on this video just about finances, because she's also a personal finance coach, and how she managed her finances as a woman, a married woman, and with kids, and how to build wealth abroad. And she knows what she's talking about. Her and her investment collective were just featured on the Read podcast as this week's Black Excellence because of their hotel investments. So if you guys are thinking about that money, check out that YouTube video.
Think about the money, for real.
Yes.
Think your money, man. I just see people waste so much money because you earn more, so you spend more, but you never got that skill of how to budget. And like I said, this is the non-sexy, and I know a number of you who are listening. I see some of y'all who I know are expat coaches, and I know that you work with folks, Christine. But this is something, it's such a non-sexy topic, but it's the realest of the realest. The money and your relationships, because those two will crumble real quick if you don't know what's going, if you don't have a handle on it and you aren't very aware about yourself in your relationship with money.
It's crazy, y'all. It's crazy out here in international streets. It's not all painted with gold, but it's still a good opportunity. But the thing is that you got to be real. You got to be real with yourself. And there's no shortcuts. A lot of times, when you want to go abroad, cool, you want to have a different experience. Yes, learn languages, use like Japan. All right. But as Amanda said, you still got to do the work of personal development. You still have to do the work. You got to do the work. The work is the work. That's the thing. You got to do it. We have ran over time. Thank you so much for rocking with me.
Were we supposed to be an hour, or how long were we supposed to be?
We're supposed to be an hour. And I just looked up, it's an hour and 40
Y'all got the extended cut remix, so maybe I should do lives. These are fun.
You should do it. I think it's really fun. And I think it's also, just as podcaster, I think it's a really good way to continuously promote your past archive, right? So some people who are like, oh my God, they just came on Flourish and Foreign. Amanda's amazing. I gotta go check out her episode. Yeah, that's what we want.
You should check me out anyway. If you don't, half of y'all, I'm I know, because Black expat. But yeah, y'all should still, you should come hang out the Black expat and the podcast and whatever else I got going on the site.
Thank you guys. So we're going to try to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes. If you guys have any comments about dating abroad, the Bali situation we were talking about, being a third culture kid, what else have we talked about? Black identity across the diaspora, everything we've talked about, anything.
Olive Garden versus Italian actual food. Yo, you want to hear? While people are typing their comments, let me tell you about what I heard in Argentina. Literally, that should be the name of my book. Let me tell you about what I heard in ... In Argentina, I was watching this beautiful, I was at a gaucho ranch, and they had they had the Brazilian steakhouse food kind of coming, and there was this Argentinian tango performance. And this white American guy was there with his family, and they were kind of obnoxious in general. And there were people we've traveled. And I'm like, yeah, but apparently you haven't immersed yourself. And we're watching this Argentinian tango. And he says to me, they're not doing it right. They're not doing it sexy enough. They're not doing it the way they do it Dancing with the Stars. And I said,
ooh, not Dancing with the Stars?
And I kept saying, but why do y'all keep saying the stupid stuff to me? Just my face.
Because they know that you're writing a book. That's why.
Y'all just roll up with this free information of ridiculousness. Anyway,
white people who are watching this.
No, don't get twisted, because I've seen Black people say crazy stuff too. So I'm not putting this on
That's true, but let me just say from my point of view, the most crazy stuff that I've ever heard always comes from white people, white British people. I'm in Spain, so it's like white British people that say like crazy things,
No,
and they're
that's
generally like really
that's just the way the Brits in Spain. Yeah, no, I
yeah.
got you.
I'm just gonna say, get your cousins, like get your cousin because they're making y'all look bad. That's all I gotta say. Y'all look bad because I y'all like. So you want Olive Garden? You don't really want to go to Italy.
And the funny part is, I am always the only Black person around, and so I'm literally thinking to myself,
like looking around like,
why am I attracting all the crazy conversation? And he said it, and I looked at him and said, "Dance, these people created this dance."
Yo, I gotta tell, I had a podcast guest, Jamila. She moved to Argentina because of tango. An amazing story. It sounds like it should be a movie, actually. Somebody should write it up because how she even got into tango was like such a movie. If she heard this, she's going off. I'm sorry, Jamila, if you watch this in the future, she's gonna be like Dancing with the Stars because now she's a tango dancer. She's a tango business. This is just disrespectful. Like, come on, Chad, you can't just be going around countries and like you just can't.
And the part they killed me is that they prided on themselves on the fact that they were these travelers. They've been to all these other places and blah, blah, blah. And I looked at them and I was like, you guys are so obnoxious. And they were the only other Americans. Everyone else was from Latin America. And I was just like, you are so obnoxious, though. Like, you're so loud and obnoxious. But anyway.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. All right, people, let's look at these last few comments.
I could talk all day.
Hey, Krishan. Hey, Krishan. Blacks at Global. She also has a really great podcast, Blacks at Global. Check her out. She's in the comments. Yeah, okay. Oh, thank you, Krishan. Krishan watched the video that you guys should all be watching this morning, and she said it was wonderful. I'm trying to help y'all. Okay. Hey Carla of Rose Apple Global. If you are a career professional who wants to get into higher ed abroad, she is your woman. Check her out at Rose Apple Global. She's in the comments here. Thank you guys. Do another one. I'm trying to do as many IG lives with my past podcast guests as possible. They're going to be on Sundays, but Amanda, you should get into the game because it's really fun. Because you don't really have to prepare. Because with podcasts, you got to prepare. You got to edit. You got a lot of stuff to do. But this is like just conversations.
I mean, I used to do this thing, and if y'all are willing, I might do it again. I used to do this thing that essentially was called the virtual cookout. So basically, I used to do these live. It wasn't like a webinar, but it would just be like I'd grab some folks. Like I see Rakia from the migrating mom or migration mom is on here. And I would just we would talk about these different topics and people used to think they were hilarious because we would just say all the crazy stuff. And so I might bring that back up maybe in the spring because I think people found it very helpful. And I know that there's a question, do we have a podcast? So sure. I know depending if you came on late before we close out, once again, you can find me at theblackexpat.com. Obviously, I'm on our Instagram account, so you could just follow us there. You could also find our podcast. It's called The Global Chatter, and it is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. We are starting season 2 on January 26th, but right now we've got bonus content up, so you could listen to our previous season. Super excited. Right off the bat, we're going to talk about the British expat experience from a Black point of view, as well as we're going to talk about white expat privilege and white saviorism. So those are some of the early first 3 episodes that are coming up for season 2. And so if you want to follow us, we are on Instagram, Twitter. We're the Black Expat Presents on YouTube, Pinterest, wherever, Facebook.
That's how I found you, Amanda, was through your YouTube channel. Excellently produced YouTube videos, just beautiful, just fantastic.
That's like 2 of us. People are like our team. It was 2 of us holding
y'all held it down because it's such great content. It's stuff that I aspire to produce 5 years from now because I can't.
We've got some plans for 2021 and 2022 for our video stuff because I know that people really enjoy it. But yeah, So I just, if you literally Google the Black expat, you'll be able to find me if you want to just reach out. But yeah, I'm super excited for what we've all had, and I know we've gone over. So, but Christine, I thank you so much for your time and letting me. I told you whatever comes up and whatever came up. I don't even know if we even did the questions on your list, but
But
we
we
kind
had
of got there.
I enjoyed it. I just want to say one last thing. BK Duchess of Success says, this reminds me of the American women who asked for French fries and didn't want to eat escargot because she's in France. When in France, one must eat French fries. BK Duchess of Success, you're hilarious. She has a funny things. Krishan says, I shared in my group, the one on finding friends. The group loved it. Oh, thank you, Krishan. Thank you so much. That's what I like about this space of particularly Black women in travel, Black women in the expat space. Everybody's really collaborative and lovely, and I love it. Adelia says, that's why I keep my mouth closed so no one knows I'm American.
Girl, and if it gets real rough, sometimes I'll lie and say I'm Canadian. Ain't nobody know except Canadians.
I will say, depending on where I am, sometimes I only speak to people in Spanish, and then they're like, wait. Here in Barcelona, people become Colombian with French, so that's interesting. But all right, yes, and that is it. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you all for just sticking around and listening to this hilarious conversation, but also very informative, might I add. Please listen to and follow Flourish in the Foreign podcast. You can listen to it across all platforms. We're available on Pandora now. That was exciting email to get after 5 months. And iHeartRadio and everything. You can listen to it on the website www.flourishintheforeign.com. Also, obviously, go to the YouTube channel, check it out. If you like this IGTV, I've actually done like 10 of them. So go back into the archives and watch the other ones I've done because they're always really lovely and amazing. Also, if you would like to support Flourish in the Foreign, you can. You can become a Patreon subscriber at www.flourishintheforeign.com/flourishforeign. You can cash out the podcast. I love that. I love waking up to those at $flourishforeign. You can contribute to the production of this whole thing by going to our Amazon wish list and gifting us some production things. Someone actually gifted us, I don't know what they are right now, some really nice headphones. Very nice. Thank you so much. If you have a business or service that you feel is in alignment with Flourish in the Foreign, you want to get your business and service in front of all of these fantastic Black women and people who are just internationally minded, come holla at your girl, www.flourishintheforeign.com/contact. And that's about it. I think that is all the things to plug. I probably forgot something.
Everything and then some.
Oh, wait, and I do have a course coming out that I'm actually really excited about. I know everybody has a moving abroad course. I understand that. But people have been asking me in particular to actually do this, so I'm answering the call. I'm doing it's like a moving abroad course, but it is called Flourish in the Foreign, International Living Made Possible. What we're going to be doing is really start with intentionality, something I've been talking about throughout this entire talk. We're going to start with intentionality. We're going to get down to the whys of why you want to move abroad. Then we're going to go from there to country selection. We're then going to go through finances because it's important. We're going to talk about what you're going to do to support yourself financially abroad because you don't go on a wish and a dream. We're not going to do that. We're either going to go with a job or business, people. That's what we're going to do. But we're at the end of the 5 weeks. It's a really intimate cohort. It's a live course. We're really going to have you with a game plan, an executable game plan that's not just going to get you abroad. Because like we talked about, depending on what kind of passport you have, getting abroad is sometimes not the issue. It's really about staying abroad, and it's about thriving abroad. Don't move somewhere just be enduring. Like you could have struggled at home. That don't make no sense. I want you to thrive if that is what you want to do. That is just my my main goal. And especially because oftentimes we conflate just moving abroad, like that's the life event. No, you're still living your life. This is a new chapter of your life. Let's be conscious, let's be present, and let's actually try to plan. You know, life happens, but let's have an intention for this chapter, and let's actually execute some plans. Let's have some actions that are in alignment with this plan, right? That's what this course is about. It's the first time I'm doing this and I'm excited about it. It actually starts this week. So if you're interested, check out my link in my bio, and get in touch, because it's going to be a small one. It's going to be a cozy little thing. I'm going to try it out, see how it goes. And yeah, I think that's about it. That's all the plug-in for today. I was Amanda at the Black Expat Global Chatter. Check out her podcast. I'm really excited about your new season. Super duper excited. And check out her YouTube channel, y'all. I'm not joking. Her content is really, really great. I think it's beautifully produced. So please check that out. All right. If that is it, everyone, I think that's no one said anything. Okay. Thank you. Wait, what did you guys say? Okay. It was great. Okay. Great. And can some
BK Duchess, just if you want to check out, I think the easiest thing from everything that she said, just click our links in our bios, in our Instagram bios, and that should take you to everything you need, both for Flourish in the Foreign as well as the Black Expat. Okay, because I know it's a lot.
I know, because it's just a lot. There's a lot of stuff, but we got links for you, so don't worry about it. All right. Thank you so much, Amanda. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being so patient and gracious with your time. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. I love the fact that every time we have a conversation, it's just so open and honest. I just love your vibe. I love your generosity.
Girl,
I told you this
before. That's what it is.
Appreciate. That's how I get that.
I'm an old enough Black woman at this point. I said it on one podcast. I ain't got no filter. I don't care. I say what I say. Keep moving. It's like everybody keeps asking me about DEI work. Like, how can I do DEI initiatives? I'm like, stop being racist. Now pay me $1,500. I mean, it's really. Y'all, we could be here all day, but thank you.
That needs to be a topic on your barbecue, because I have thoughts on the DEI and how a lot of people are now in DEI work. I have whole thoughts on that. Anyway,
for another day, ma'am.
That's for another. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.